Information Risk with David Loshin, powered by Insight Jam.
Hey, this is Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and we are back with another episode of the Information Risk Podcast with David Loshin, who is our resident expert with all things data governance. And today, David, we're going to be discussing customer due diligence and the risks associated with poor customer due diligence, and we're going to take it all the way to cryptocurrency and virtual tender, if you will. So take it away. Tee us up. What did you find for us to talk about with regard to customer due diligence?
So thanks, Doug, and thanks again for bringing me back for yet another episode. So I was kind of digging around for something to drill down into today, and I came across an interesting enforcement action on the website of the Office of Currency Control, OCC.gov. And I'm going to read a little bit about this. I mean, basically, there's a number of enforcement actions that OCC will take when it does an analysis of what banks may be doing that lead to potential issues with their customers or potential issues with the transparency through which they're reporting their transactions, et cetera. And one of these caught my eye. So I looked at it a little more carefully. It's a bank in Ohio. And I don't think any of these examples are really huge banks. They're not like too big to fail, but they are all banks where they do fall under the jurisdiction of the Office of Currency Control. And so, I'm going to read from the enforcement action document, and again, we're going to put links to all of these items in the chat area below. But so if anybody wants to read through them in greater detail, again, that's great for insomniacs if you are
nothing like reading an enforcement act. Exactly.
But I'm gonna tee this up right away from the first paragraph of the thing. It says the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency has found unsafe or unsound practices, including those relating to the board of directors and bank management's failure to develop and implement an appropriate strategic plan, appropriately manage and control liquidity and interest rate risks, implement effective Bank Secrecy Act anti-money laundering internal controls, and appoint a Bank Secrecy Act officer with the requisite skills and expertise to oversee the Bank Secrecy Act program and the bank's violation of law, rule, or regulation, including a violation relating to the conduct on conducting ongoing customer due diligence. So I'm going to jump down to the section. There's a bunch of sections here, and they all kind of talk about what the bank needs to do. And basically, when this enforcement action comes out, it's I'm presuming is the result of negotiation between the Office of Currency Controller, which I'm going to refer to now as OCC, and the particular people in the bank that are under the gun. I'm going to jump to the section on customer due diligence and risk identification. And it says that the bank has to submit a written documentation, an acceptable written customer due diligence program to ensure appropriate collection and analysis of customer information when opening new accounts, when renewing or modifying existing accounts for customers, and when the bank obtains event-driven information indicating that it would be prudent to obtain updated information in order to understand the nature of its customer relationships and generate and maintain an accurate customer risk profile. So it says that the program should include clear definitions of low, moderate, and high-risk customers, a methodology for assigning defined risk levels to the customers that considers the customer's entire relationship and appropriate factors such as type of customer, purpose of the account, geographic location, expected account activity. Then procedures at a minimum have to outline criteria for when outgoing reviews are warranted, processes for changing customer risk profiles, ensuring the documentation obtained is commensurate with the risk of the customer, and there's a whole bunch of other items. And so this, of course, it triggered in my mind, what is it when they're talking about, managing customer risk profiles? Is really analyzing customer behaviors and being able to maintain information about each customer depending on all the associated accounts and relationships that customer will have with that bank. So it's not just, okay, that customer opened a single account, but rather it says customer's entire relationship. So I can give an example. I have a relationship with our bank, and in that relationship, I have an account for myself and my wife, a checking account, a money market account. We've got 5 kids, so each one of them has at least a checking account. Some of them have savings accounts, although with 0 interest, there's kind of no point in having a savings account. I also run a business called Knowledge Integrity, which if you're interested in hearing more about what we do, certainly reach out to me. But I've had accounts with the same bank for a number of years under that entity. And then we also have another business, a small business that we run, and we've got accounts under that entity. And so we've got a relationship with the bank that extends way beyond what a simple checking account would be. And so when they deal with us, we go into the bank, they look at the entire relationship, not just the account that we're going there to deposit a check into or take money out at the ATM. So understanding the full relationship or customer's entire relationship requires understanding linkages across different customer accounts, no matter where that individual or that entity lies. So let me take a break and see if there's anything we want to kind of drill down into.
Well, so I just want to point out that this OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, is a bureau of the Department of Treasury, and as a consumer, you don't necessarily maintain an awareness of all the other things that are happening within the system to keep basically the banks and the other financial players in line. But there is within the Treasury this sort of auditing happening and this sort of enforcement and ultimately these penalties.
Yeah, and actually, it's not just one. I happen to know this because I live in the D.C. area, and my neighbors, the guy next door worked for the FBI, and the guy up the street works for the OCC, and somebody else worked for FinCEN, which is the another enforcement agency. And there's a guy that my son was in the same class with his daughter, and he worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission. So there's actually all sorts of different agencies, and you learn, just by walking up the street, in around here, you learn what people do and what they're actually doing, because you just chat with them, and to the extent that they can discuss what they do. But also, once you get a good understanding of the scope of the different enforcement agencies or agencies that are given the power of enforcement, then you start getting a much better understanding of the extent to which some of these compliance directives actually have implications on their data management.
Well, and truth of the matter is, this isn't really sexy stuff, right? You're not going to typically find this in your news feed when a small bank gets dinged by the OCC for not. I mean, it means a lot to that bank. They're certainly not issuing press releases about it, but the OCC is probably announcing it, but it's not being covered to any great extent because it isn't sexy. But in fairness, there are sexy enforcement releases and judgments that we'll get into a little bit later that have massive implications.
There are, but even those, like. By the way, you're triggering another topic that I want to get into, which is when you talk about news feeds, and I'm going to pivot here for just 30 seconds.
Feel free.
That our news feeds are curated based on algorithms to the point where you only are going to see in your news feed the news that somebody who's doing that curation wants you to see. And so unless you are continuously going to news items about OCC enforcement actions, you'll never see any of these. And in fact, the one that we're going to talk about later, I never saw that, but But I mean, I guess I could have if I looked at at page 16 of the Wall Street Journal on the day that it came out.
In order for it to reach that level where you might see it because you see peripherally what the Wall Street Journal is covering or the New York Times or whatever your major kind of feeds are, unless it raises to that level, which usually requires it to be clickbaitable, honestly, if you want to get down to it. Nobody's going to be clicking on the judgment that happened to a small regional bank in Ohio against things like this. But yet, my broader point is, despite the fact that you may not know it or that it may not raise to the level of newsworthiness in your feed, these things matter, and that enforcement is imperative, particularly when it results in potentially affecting folks that may not have any political power at all to manage against these larger organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll turn back to enforcement. I'll actually comment that I saw another enforcement action that drew my attention, which had nothing to do with customer due diligence, but it was, what's interesting to me is when there's implications associated with these actions that goes to a much broader audience. So this particular other situation, they announced, it was basically yesterday, I saw that there was a press release and they announced that they had come to this agreement about what the action was going to be, and they announced it at the end of the day, and after hours trading of that particular bank's stock went down 5%. So again, like we talked about this in another episode where we talked about when a stock's price goes down because of data issues or information issues, that there's a loss of value. So when we saw that other example with what was it? Not Trulia, the other real estate.
Zillow.
Zillow, yeah, and a loss of 30% in its value. I mean, that's massive. But even 5% loss in value is significant if your corporate valuation is,
Well, and truth be told, that's part of the reason why you may never hear about it, because there's a very large monetary excuse or purpose to keep it quiet, because it's going to have implications in the markets and it's going to have implications for stockholders, and so there's very well paid PR people designed to suppress that sort of news from making it out into the feeds.
Yeah, it still gets out there, if it didn't get out there, the stock wouldn't have dropped. And, like the analysts say, it's because of this. But anyway, let me get to another example because it's interesting to look at what the actions are saying that the banks need to do to get an understanding of what it is that the banks are doing wrong. So this one was actually from 2023, but it's another enforcement action and agreement between the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC, and what's called the National Iron Bank in Salisbury, Connecticut. So again, I never heard of these banks, but and they're probably like very local banks. Although it's called National Iron Bank, so maybe it is national, but I never heard of it. But I'm going to drill into their section about customer due diligence. It says at a minimum, so they need to define policies and procedures for ongoing customer due diligence, and that must be adequate to ensure that the bank understands the nature and purpose of customer relationships for developing a customer risk profile. So yet again, we have this concept of a customer risk profile. So it says that they need to ensure accounts are accurately risk rated and customer due diligence performed as appropriate, including risk-based procedures for obtaining additional information or for higher risk accounts. Ensure the customer risk ratings are appropriately incorporated into the bank's overall assessment. Ensure staff responsible for gathering information have sufficient authority, training, and skills to do that. provide for the maintenance of an accurate and complete list of higher risk profile customers that identifies current customers and accounts exhibiting high risk characteristics for money laundering, terrorist financing, or other illicit activity, and providing for ongoing due diligence reviews of these higher risk profile customers for analysis and documentation of information, which includes transactional analysis and then critical analysis of information in the file. So, same theme, right? Customer risk analysis and high risk characteristics. What they're really saying again is the failure in that is to be addressed is the fact that they don't have adequate mechanisms and methods and policies and procedures for identifying who their customers are and linking the customer data from multiple accounts in multiple scenarios and being able to do an effective customer risk analysis that allows them to identify which of their customers potentially have a predisposition or some other reason to believe that they might be involved in illicit activities.
Well, and this is these enforcement acts are incredibly specific and they're lengthy and it goes all the way down to, it literally spells out down to the staffing level. Within 90 days of the date of the agreement, the board shall ensure that the bank is appropriately staffed with Bank Secrecy Act personnel with the requisite expertise and training, and on and on and on and on and on. Within 90 days, there will be an appropriate BSA officer and supporting staff. That's Article 7. It's just ridiculous. 26 pages of just incredible process and procedure that needs to be followed in order to be compliant. And the idea that, that this bank requires that level of correction is something.
Yeah, and again, I'll just drill into one more example because what you're saying is exactly on point, which is that they're not making this up, and it's not like they've got a rubber stamp template that says, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to do X, Y, and Z, and then every single enforcement agreement makes use of that same template. It actually, there's that level of detail means that somebody's job was to go to this bank and analyze what their issues were and identify a whole litany of things that they needed to do in order to be compliant.
Well, and truth of the matter is, David, if you're looking to be a little surreptitious with some of your financial dealings, you may want to go to a obscure little bank in Salisbury, Connecticut to handle some of your more risky transactions in the hopes that they don't have any kind of, proper suspicious activity auditing going on.
Yeah, and that may be true. And again, I've never heard of these banks, so I don't know how big or small they are. I just get the impression that they're not like Citibank or Chase, or Bank of America, right? Maybe they're big regional banks and they might have a lot of assets under control. But you're right. I think that you're not going to be going to Citibank if you want to do money laundering. Maybe you do. I don't know. I'm not.
I don't know.
I hang around with money.
I haven't been very good at it, but
right.
But it strikes me.
And I don't hang around with money launderers.
This is exactly the kind of reason why the OCC exists, right? To kind of watch these fringe. To watch I'm sure the OCC is monitoring the large banks just as much as they need to, but truth of the matter is it's always in the periphery. It's always in the shadows. It's always on the edges. And I have to say, the other thing is, like, why are they even looking at these banks in the first place unless they already have a suspicion that something not right is going on? So let me just give one more example because it just reinforces what we're saying, which is this is an enforcement agreement in 2022 with a bank called the Blue Ridge Bank National Association in Martinsville, Virginia, and same kind of language. I'm looking for it right now. It says
it must include, for the fintech business, written bank policies and procedures for conducting ongoing customer due diligence to enable the bank to identify, assess, and evaluate the bank's customers for purposes of compliance with the Bank Secrecy Act, develop customer due diligence processes that are commensurate with the bank's anti-money laundering risk profile with increased focus on higher risk customers and customer transactions, understand the nature and purpose of the customer relationship to develop a customer risk profile, collect, maintain, and update customer information for all customers, including information regarding the beneficial owners of legal entity customers, use customer information, customer risk profiles to understand the types of transactions a particular customer would be expected to engage in and as a baseline against which suspicious transactions are identified, and conduct ongoing monitoring for the purpose of identifying and reporting suspicious transactions. So there, it's even more laid out in detail about, what it is that my assumption always is going to be, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not like they put a no fishing sign in a place where there aren't any fish. It's like the reason they are doing these things because somebody's doing something that would raise suspicion about whether this is the appropriate controls are in place to make sure that phishing is not happening.
Well, and we're going to take a break, but when we get back, I mean, you dropped a term that is certainly one that brings in a whole host of other potential information risks. But you mentioned fintech, and so when we get back after the break, we'll talk a little bit more about the future of money and modern monetary theory. And where that begins to get very dicey with when you layer in technology and you layer in encryption and you layer in all the other complexities that can create a rather elusive audit trail.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation.
All right, we'll be right back.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.
All right, David, we're back. And before we get into all of the kind of juicy virtual crypto and currency issues and some rather more sexy stories, let's just talk quickly about what is customer due diligence, and let's just kind of put a fine point on this particular information risk.
Yes, that would be great. So what is customer due diligence? And there is a customer due diligence rule. And, I mentioned this other organization. I mean, we were talking about the OCC before, the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, but there's this other group or other agency called FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and that is also part of the Treasury. And they defined as, 2016, they had a definition of this rule, and I'm going to read a little bit from their website. It amends the Bank Secrecy Act. It aims to improve financial transparency and prevent criminals and terrorists from misusing companies to disguise their illicit activities and launder their ill-gotten gains. The customer due diligence rule clarifies and strengthens customer due diligence requirements for U.S. banks, mutual funds, brokers, or dealers in securities, futures, commission merchants, and introducing brokers in commodities. The CDD rule requires these covered financial institutions to identify and verify the identity of the natural persons known as beneficial owners of legal entity customers who own, control, and profit from companies when those companies open accounts. It has 4 requirements. It requires covered financial institutions to establish and maintain written policies and procedures that are reasonably designed to 1, identify and verify the identity of customers, 2, identify and verify the identity of the beneficial owners of companies opening accounts. 3, understand the nature and purpose of customer relationships to develop customer risk profiles. And 4, conduct ongoing monitoring to identify and report suspicious transactions, and on a risk basis, maintain and update customer information. With respect to the requirement to obtain beneficial ownership information, financial institutions will have to identify and verify the identity of any individual who owns 25% or more of a legal entity and an individual who controls the legal entity. So summarizing that, it's basically saying that it's not just about what the Bank Secrecy Act said, which was this whole anti-money laundering or AML and know your customer KYC regulations that had to do with knowing who the customer was who was opening the account, but also who are the beneficial owners. This is a key difference. Who are the beneficial owners of the companies that are opening the account? So I could go as your lawyer, say, and I could go to the local bank and I'd say, I'm opening an account for InsightJam. And they would say, okay, well, who are you? And I'd say, well, I'm legal representative for InsightJam because I'm their lawyer and I'm opening this account. Well, that might have been sufficient, 20 years ago, but today that's not sufficient. They need to say, well, give me a list of who are all the beneficial owners who own more than 25% of InsightJam, because we need that to be able to develop a risk profile associated with all those individuals. And so if they find that one of the 25% owners of InsightJam also is a owner of a drug cartel in Monterrey, Mexico, and also is a shipper of fentanyl from China, et cetera, that might raise some suspicions because those are illicit activities that are potentially being funded by money laundering, or are using money laundering to clean the proceeds of those transactions, and that would be against the law. So the basic idea there is that your organization, here's where this comes into our continuing themes of where are the information vulnerabilities within your organization, and now we're talking about financial organizations, banks, commodities traders. What were the other ones that they said there? Mutual funds, brokers or dealers, et cetera. Anybody in the financial services industry is presumably going to be required to abide by these rules, right?
Yeah, FinCEN is another kind of interesting structural agency within the Treasury Department that is doing all kinds of things that you may not necessarily hear because, again, it isn't raising up into the level of your curated news feed. But you're right. I mean, they're tracking financial behavior that is directly benefiting bad actors, not only with regard to terrorism in the Mideast, but you're right, drug trafficking south of the border, passport fraud and identity theft. I mean, you go to the FinCEN newsroom and it's just his litany of bad behavior that they're working
we
against.
Are lucky to have we're lucky to have an agency like that is monitoring those types of things because in countries that don't have that sort of control mechanism and monitoring, that's where bad actors run rampant, right? So we're pretty lucky, but also because they help identify where where are these bad actors coming from and what are they trying to do, right?
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's shocking the amount of news items that these guys that this agency releases with regard to combating fentanyl trafficking or extreme settler violence in the West Bank or Iraq-based bank money laundering. I mean, they're into the global financial markets at the murky edges, trying to decipher how to put some sort of stop to grade A bad behavior.
Well, here's the from the Federal Register, which again, we'll provide links for all these things. Here's the purpose of of modifying this customer due diligence requirements. It's at the time that this came out, the institutions weren't required to know the identity of the individuals who own or control the legal entity. But that enabled criminals, kleptocrats, and others looking to hide ill-gotten proceeds to access the financial system anonymously. Beneficial ownership requirement will address this weakness and provide information that will assist law enforcement in financial investigations. And they say that there are 4 core elements of customer due diligence: customer identification, beneficial ownership, identification, verification, understanding the nature of customer relationships, and ongoing monitoring. So that's pretty critical. I think, the point that is to be reinforced here is that they talk about why this is important, and it's necessary to be able to enhance financial transparency and help to safeguard financial systems against illicit use. So things like enabling law enforcement and the intelligence community to identify the assets and accounts of terrorist organizations, corrupt actors, money launderers, drug kingpins, proliferators of weapons of mass destruction, and other national security risks. So, I just want to kind of pull that out, because when we started talking about this earlier, what we were talking about was, a handful of small banks in certain regions who are being called on the carpet because they don't have adequate controls in place for doing customer due diligence. But the real reason here that it's important for every single financial institution, or every institution that is handling financial transactions, to be compliant with this is that we're talking about really bad people who are, we're not talking about somebody who's looking to take advantage of illicit avocado growth in northern Mexico. These are people who are we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars that are being transferred to fund kleptocrats and in Russia, those folks that are mercenaries that are being hired to fight in places like Ukraine, and drug kingpins who are building these massive amounts of channels for flowing fentanyl and other really bad drugs that are killing more and more people all the time, and weapons of mass destruction, all these kinds of things. This is what we're talking about. And you were right. When we look at these little banks, it's not because, the OCC is trying to pick on a little bank. It's because if you're a bad guy, you're not going to go, like we said before, you're not going to go to Chase Bank or go to Citibank or go to Bank of America and say, hi, I need to open an account. And by the way, we're going to be channeling huge amounts of money through these different accounts. You're going to go to a bank in Salisbury, Connecticut, and you're going to go to a bank in Lorain, Ohio, and you're going to go to a bank in Martinsville, Virginia, and you're going to open up these accounts, under obscured ownership relationships, and you're going to start funneling transactions from bank to bank, and then you're going to funnel that back to, somewhere where there are no restrictions, like Cayman Islands or Channel Island banks, where the trail gets lost, and now all of a sudden you got these mechanisms for funding terrorist activities.
Well, so right. So actually, I think we're going to take another break, and then we're going to dive into kind of where that heads, because the bad behavior that we were just talking about can also be incredibly obscured through the use of cryptocurrency, the dark web, all these other things. And I think it's actually interesting. As I was just looking at the FinCEN website, I noticed their insignia. And it's fascinating because it has binary numbers baked into the insignia. There's an eagle, like you would expect, and a star, and some other kind of federal-looking fonts that roll around it. But there's also this green circle on the inside around the globe with ones and zeros a whole collection of them, and it says on their site, they unveiled a new insignia back in 2018, and the binary numbers spell out FinCEN in binary code and represent the financial data FinCEN uses to keep our country strong and prosperous, our financial system secure, and our communities and families safe from harm. But honestly, this is a game that is happening at a massive scale. This digital currency game, most notably, obviously, with cryptocurrency, which one would say was kind of born for the dark web, but has now become a mainstream, almost a mainstream commodity or an asset class. So when we get back, I want to dive into that, and I think you've got a couple of examples that we want to talk about. So we'll take a break and get after it.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. And if you prefer to listen, please rate and review the Insight Jam podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, David, I've been pushing us to try to get down to our cryptocurrency examples because, again, as I was saying just a moment ago, this is where we are now, and if you listen, every major financial, national and geopolitical financial institution is making noises about digital currencies. Digital currencies are where we're going to end up. There's no question in my mind. Crypto and Bitcoin and all of the offshoots and advantages and secrecy that revolves around this sort of thing is unacceptable to the world's financial institutions. And so they're going to usurp it. They're going to create their own digital currencies, and those digital currencies, in my opinion, will be very easily tracked, and you won't have the ability to, I don't know. We'll see where it all goes, but there's definitely a move afoot to get toward that because of the implications that are currently, I think that you'll probably highlight right now with regard to, bad behavior in and around hard to track money.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the biggest problems here is that the whole cryptocurrency ecosystem is designed around these distributed ledgers that provide some kind of anonymity that is an incredible.
Almost a complete anonymity.
Yeah, it's essentially provides the ability to maintain records of ownership of financial accounts without having to expose who actually is owning the account. So I can set up some kind of account if I go to China, say, and I'll set up an account in China with some kind of, what they call a virtual asset service provider. And I will do my transactions. And if I do all my transactions in China and I live in China, and then they don't need to report what I'm doing to anybody, right? They can let that, they can do that as they will,
once you're into a blockchain,
yeah,
there's no way for them to track it.
Right. So
that's the point of the blockchain, and that's obscure it to the point where it's untrackable.
So a lot of, so right now, Bitcoin, for example, so Bitcoin is an example of a cryptocurrency. And I think for the most part, people look at that not as, it's not like people are going to, the supermarket up the street and paying in Bitcoin. I haven't seen that as one of the options on the terminal at the point of sale. But what people are using Bitcoin for is either transferring large amounts of money or doing transactions that they don't want any kind of snooping on that. So like you mentioned dark web before, a lot of those transactions where, they're buying buying fentanyl, of course, the transactions are being done in some kind of cryptocurrency.
Correct.
And
I think I think there's no doubt in my mind that the two evolved around the same time. The internet came out and it was all, sunshine and rainbows about how it's going to improve everybody's life. But inevitably, bad actors use new technology to take advantage of what it provides them. And in this particular case, it provides them with anonymity. So ultimately, as the dark web emerged, so did cryptocurrency. And we can all, embrace this, all the Tom Brady ads about, crypto.com and how, it's all now fun and games and everybody can do it. But the truth of the matter is that it began as a way to move money that was untrackable for the purposes of terrorism, drug smuggling, money laundering, bing, 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 all the baddest things you can do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and there's this obvious link between all that stuff and bad actors. What's interesting is to kind of look at a couple of examples, and one example, I'm actually the FinCEN. It was FinCEN who released this. This is Department of the Treasury, so it wasn't necessarily FinCEN, but it was a national money laundering risk assessment. And they talk about what are all the different types of things that are being done using different types of money laundering schemes. And it's like, ransomware, malware. Well, yeah, of course. But then there's these money laundering organizations in China, Russian money laundering, human trafficking, human smuggling, bulk cash smuggling. Well, that's not going to be crypto. That's going to be somebody with a bag full of $100 bills. But the types of things that they care about, these are, literally, these are streamlined by the use of cryptocurrencies. And let me actually point to a specific example, which was not long after the October 7th attack that Hamas did on Israel. There was the Treasury Department did this investigation about the use of cryptocurrency prior to that for funding their actions. Now, again, what do we say, these cryptocurrencies are being used for? They're being used for drug transactions. They're being used for human trafficking. They're being used for weapons of mass destruction. They're being used for other types of terrorist activities. So apparently, again, we'll get you a link to this article. It was an article in the Wall Street Journal. It says the U.S. Treasury Department is investigating $165 million in cryptocurrency-linked transactions that may have helped finance Hamas before the militant group's October 7th attack against Israel. Treasury officials say that the U.S. designated terror group's increased use of digital financing underscores the need for Congress to approve new powers to oversee cryptocurrency as Hamas's access to traditional sources of funding is hit by Western sanctions. So let me drill down on that for a minute. Which is that the use of sanctions is an attempt to influence bad actor behavior by cutting off their access to funds. And so, since Russia invaded Ukraine, there have been numerous sanctions against Russia, Iran, and their assorted nuclear development activities have led to a number of different sanctions, so that they're unable to sell oil, for example. But Russia is buying oil from Iran, and they're probably paying for it, in crypto transactions, because that is a mechanism by which they're able to exchange value, even though, like I said, you're not going to walk into the hardware store and pull out your crypto wallet. But what they're doing is they're talking about millions of dollars for transactions to be buying bombs and tanks and to be paying off drug smugglers and all that sort of thing. So in this article here from the Wall Street Journal, they're saying that they're continuing to assess that terrorists have a preference for the use of traditional financial products and services, but they concern as their access is cut off, they're increasingly going to turn to virtual assets. And that was what the Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo said in a letter to lawmakers accompanying the report. And so FinCEN wrote the report. It said nearly 24 financial institutions reported around $165 million in transactions that were related to Hamas and digital assets. And that's a lot of money, and that's probably a tip of the iceberg again, because they said that's 24 financial institutions. If I'm a terrorist organization that is looking to get funded, I'm not going to limit it to 24 financial institutions. I'm going to have my proxies go to hundreds of financial institutions and get my funding that way. So the issue here is that there's no controls, or there are limited controls on these crypto organizations because they don't fall into the bucket of traditional financial institutions.
Well, and in fairness, that it's always you're chasing the technology. It's inevitable that you're chasing the technology. We'll be doing it with artificial intelligence. We are doing it with artificial intelligence, but with cryptocurrencies now, it's I think it was launched I think Bitcoin was launched in 2012, 2010, somewhere around there maybe. It's now older, and as you would expect, it had its kind of carefree and irresponsible days, but now the federal government has gotten very serious because it has gone mainstream. It is now Binance and Coinbase and Crypto.com and Tom Brady and Super Bowl ads and it's no longer a bunch of people in the shadows. It's people in the suburbs who have cryptocurrency, and you have to track it.
You mentioned Binance, and that's another thing that I want to point to. So what is Binance? Binance is an example of one of these virtual asset service providers. And what was interesting is that in January, there was a legal a ruling against Binance, which is it's Chinese. It is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. And I'm reading from this article from Mini and Conant. So again, we'll provide links. It says, in a landmark legal development for the cryptocurrency industry, Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, along with its CEO, pleaded guilty to charges related to anti-money laundering violations. And there's a link there to the Office of Public Affairs of the United States Department of Justice. Just to read into this a little bit, it says that in November 2023, the decision resulted in Binance agreeing to pay over $4 billion in fines, one of the largest corporate penalties in U.S. history. The charges stemming from violations of the Bank Secrecy Act and failure to establish an effective anti-money laundering program highlight the growing legal scrutiny on cryptocurrency exchanges and the high price of non-compliance. So, if we link back to the Department of Justice press release, it talks the same thing. It was that Binance pleaded guilty and agreed to pay over $4 million to resolve the investigation into violations. And specifically, what they're talking about is the types of transactions that they were allowing to finance, largely associated with money laundering, and I believe.
Yeah, no. So Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said in a statement, Binance turned a blind eye to its legal obligations in the pursuit of profit. Its willful failures allowed money to flow to terrorists, cyber criminals, child abusers through its platform.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, that's the Secretary of the Treasury saying that out loud.
Yeah, yes, and the acting U.S. Attorney for the Western District said the company, so they knowingly operate a financial platform without basic anti-money laundering safeguards, and the company caused illegal transactions between U.S. users and users in sanctioned jurisdictions such as Iran, Cuba, Syria, and Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. transaction for which Binance profited with significant fees. So they collected over $1 billion in trading fees for all of these illegal transactions.
It's unbelievable. I mean,
yeah, it says Binance did not implement controls that would prevent U.S. users from trading with users in Iran. And because of this international failure between January 2018 and May 2022, they willfully caused over $898 million in trades between U.S. users and users ordinarily resident in Iran. So what it's really saying is that these organizations that are not willingly obliging to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act and the types of different laws that we were talking about, like customer due diligence and anti-money laundering, they are allowing people, bad actors, to circumvent the sanctions that are being placed on these countries.
Well, it's the secret sauce of cryptocurrency. I mean, the idea. I mean, once you take away the anonymity, and this is what I'm talking about: national digital currencies. The goal of governments will be to replicate the current cryptocurrency model in a manner that can be tracked, across all transactions instantaneously down to the penny, because this is unmanageable for them, and quite frankly, these exchanges did turn a blind eye. That was the whole point.
That's the whole point, yeah. And so fortunately, you are thinking the same way that some members of Congress are thinking. I'm looking at a note from Congressional Research Service from late November of last year. It says, policymakers, including some members of Congress, are scrutinizing U.S. efforts to counter the role that cryptocurrency fundraising plays in the financing of terrorism. A key question for Congress is whether further regulation of the virtual asset sector and/or the introduction of additional countermeasures are necessary to prevent terrorist financing. And one of the things that they say, so later on in this article, it talks about U.S. policy framework for currency and foreign transactions and cryptocurrency regulation. It says contemporary U.S. Currency and foreign transaction policy is grounded in anti-money laundering and counterterrorism policies that predate the advent of virtual assets and virtual asset service providers. At issues whether and how to modify existing AML CFT policies and regulations to reflect the risks and opportunities posed by virtual assets. And so the article or the note still then goes on to talk about potential modifications or regulations associated with anti-money laundering and currency and foreign transaction monitoring requirements for all money services businesses, including virtual asset service providers. So there is some acknowledgement and recognition. It's interesting because I want to see what happens, because we've got, two ends of the spectrum. We've got the advocates for privacy in financial transactions versus the advocates for transparency in financial transactions. Of course, my interest is always, what does this mean for the organization in terms of information risk, and what do they need to be doing to be able to provide their information management infrastructure to be able to support, likely both sides.
Well, so let's wrap up by kind of drilling into that a little bit, because there's a couple of questions that I have. One is, if your business model is based upon anonymity, I mean, and you're working within that, the whole value proposition of cryptocurrency is its secrecy, and yet you're still trying to layer on top of that transparency, because that's ultimately the government's singular whatever, right? Their singular reason for getting involved in all this is to be able to see what's happening in the financial system. How do you square that? Those two. I mean, where does a company begin to wrap their head around information risk when their business model is based upon anonymity and ultimately turning a blind eye to the information that is at risk?
So what's interesting is that abstractly, what you just described is really not much different than privacy laws. So we talked about privacy laws a couple of weeks ago, and the whole issue there is how am I able to use data subject information in an environment where there are laws that say you can't do that, or really it says you can't do it under these circumstances. And what that means is you've got to come up with plans for how to navigate, the use of information in your organization in a way that doesn't violate what the law needs to say. So what we talked about two different ends of that spectrum. One was, well, if I want to be compliant with GDPR, then we're just never going to use anybody's data. But if you don't use anybody's data, then you're not doing any customer analysis. You're not doing any recommendation engines. You're not doing any data mining or data science. And so you're losing the opportunity to take advantage of tracking and monitoring what customers actually do, their behaviors, to be able to provide them with better services, presumably better services, but really to increase your bottom line. On the other hand, are there ways of putting guardrails around information use that can mask out, the details of who the individual is or who the beneficial account owner is, without and allowing the 99.9% of the transactions that are not suspicious to go ahead with the commensurate level of privacy and security, but still allowing you to highlight when there are suspicious activities and report them, because the law says you need to report suspicious activities. And that means having an effective mechanism and implementing data policy embedded directly within your information architecture.
Well, and this is, I just think this is going to be one of the most fascinating times in our digital world as we move through this ever-increasing sophistication with regard to digital currency and data privacy, along with artificial intelligence. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any question that artificial intelligence, that I would argue that it has become too sophisticated for humans to manage their way through anymore. That there's just too many layers of complexity, and this is where the information risk, I think, begins to kind of emerge, is that it's human mistakes, it's no controls, it's a lack of organizational structure, and what you're going to find, and I think you'll find it fairly quickly, is that there is going to be a way to put digital agents, artificial agents, with very specific rule sets that are evolving as they go along based upon some very interesting machine learning, and you're going to end up with either like a perfect solution that keeps you out of the weeds without having any humans involved, because the machine can understand the guardrails and the purpose of the data analysis and stay within all of those moving parts, which is an incredibly complicated thing, and ultimately maybe artificial intelligence can do that. Or what you'll end up with is humans having no idea what the artificial intelligence that they've unleashed is up to anymore, and it's gone so far afield they never even realized it would end up there, because they had no way of predicting it, because it's now self-determining. It's going to be amazing.
Well, what I saw you do just now is you leaned over and grabbed the keys to Pandora's box. And, this is what you just said. We've got not that much time left today to talk about this, but it's the topic of a much deeper conversation, which is, to what extent can we begin to rely on automated agents to be able to accurately perform the duties that have become, the scope of which has become too great for humans to be able to manage, and to what extent can we trust those automated agents to do that? And so let's say to that.
We should. That's a topic for another
absolutely
episode.
Because, I mean, that's
because this one is juicy. It's already starting to happen. There's just no question that it's going to happen at scale. And
that's like when people have shaken off their hysteria from how wonderful ChatGPT is, that it can write a poem about their dog, to the point where people are actually acknowledging and recognizing that the real value of these things is that if you train it the right way, it can do the kinds of activities that make people really bored and get them to actually make mistakes, to do it in a more predictable way. But we have, as we talked about in one of our prior episodes, there are all these underlying risks that go into the development of these AI models that we need to be aware of, that, as we chatted about in our bad data, bad AI episode, if you got bad data, you're going to have bad results.
There is a limit to what humans can control and operate at levels at which they can operate, and we're reaching, I think, a very interesting point in time where when you just see the requirements of government and government globally around data privacy and data control and legal compliance and the need for organizations to monetize or to extract the value from their data, that is an insatiable need in order to drive their profitable purpose. It's inevitable that if technology can come along, artificial intelligence and more sophisticated large language models and machine learning, it's inevitable that organizations will turn the key on that box and unleash artificial intelligence. I think oftentimes quite successfully, and I think you'll see oftentimes incredibly recklessly.
So I agree. Let's pick that as a topic for an upcoming episode. We'll drill down into that in greater detail.
All right, so let's put a fine point on just what we talked about today. Let's wrap it up by saying what did we learn today with regard to information risk and all the examples that we used.
If I had to summarize it, I would say that there's a fine line between allowing flexibility through the ecosystem that is driven by information and going over the line and allowing for bad stuff to happen when you're not subject to some set of controls. And those controls are always going to be embodied by laws and regulations and those types of things. And so being able to be nimble enough to understand why you need to do compliance with those controls and do it in a way that still maintains the level of service your customers expect is going to become a critical balancing point when it comes to implementing data policy.
And with regard to customer due diligence and how people can stay out of the weeds, I mean, obviously, if they have any doubts, it's always helpful to bring somebody in from the outside to take a look at what they're doing and the potential risks that they may be exposed to, and how would they do that if they wanted to reach out and connect with you, David?
Well, certainly, you can always reach out to me either through InsightJam or through LinkedIn, and we can schedule some time to talk about where the potential risks are and what we can do to help mitigate those risks.
Outstanding. Well, that was interesting, as always. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, David. I look forward to our next conversation, and I will always be keen to tap into your expertise around where this is all headed, with all of the modern innovation that's happening right now around data and compliance and risk and AI. It's like I said, it's never been a more fascinating time to be in technology, and I love it.
Well, thanks a lot. Looking forward to our next conversation.